The rain doesn't fall in Boston. It attacks. It hammers the fire escapes and floods the gutters and turns the streets into something that looks like the city is bleeding out slow. Nora Callahan, 24, carries her weight in the set of her jaw and the way she moves through the Dorchester diner where she works. Efficient, invisible, always watching the door. She's been watching that door for years, watching for the kind of trouble her brother Theo brings home the way other men bring laundry. Theo is 20, handsome in a reckless way that hasn't cost him enough yet, and he has a gift for finding the worst possible version of every situation. The gambling started small. Sports betting with guys from the neighborhood, nothing serious, nothing that couldn't be laughed off over cheap beer. Then it went underground. Then it went somewhere darker than underground. And Nora paid the tabs because Nora always pays the tabs, because their mother is 3 years in the ground and their father never came back from wherever fathers go when they stop being fathers. And Theo is all she has left of anything that ever meant something to her. She finds the note on a Tuesday, Theo's handwriting which she'd recognize in her sleep. I'm sorry, Nora. I tried to fix it. I made it worse. Don't be home tonight. She is home that night. She's always home. They arrive at 9:15, 3 black SUVs that park with the kind of precision that tells you the men inside do this for a living. Nora watches from the kitchen window as they fill the narrow street below, and she understands, the way you understand a storm system rolling in off the water, that whatever Theo did, he did it badly and completely. The man who comes to her door doesn't look like what she expected. Marcus Vane is 41, built like someone who learned early that the world rewards controlled power over obvious aggression. Dark coat, no tie, a face that has seen negotiation fail more times than she's had hot meals this month. He doesn't push through the door. He waits to be acknowledged. Nora Callahan, he says, and it isn't a question. Behind him, 2 men who could fold the door frame in half stand with their hands visible, which somehow makes them more frightening than if they were armed. Nora doesn't step back. She learned that from the diner. The moment you retreat, the customer owns the table. Whatever Theo owes you, $140,000, Marcus says, plus interest, plus what he took when he ran. She does the math in the space between 2 heartbeats. There is no version of this math that works. Marcus studies her the way a man studies a door he's trying to decide whether to knock on or break down. Whatever he sees in her face, not fear, not performance, something rawer and more honest than either, makes him go still. He glances at one of his men. A look passes between them that Nora can't read. There's another option, Marcus says. He lays it out without ceremony. His organization has a gap, a legitimate facing position that requires someone who can move through rooms without triggering suspicion, who can carry information without it showing on her face, who is motivated enough not to run. He needs someone real, not bought. And in 6 months, if she performs what's asked, Theo's debt disappears. She walks away clean. And if I say no? Marcus looks at her with something that isn't cruelty and isn't kindness. It's the particular respect of a man who already knows what she's going to say. You won't, he says. He's right, she won't. What he doesn't tell her, what she won't understand until she's already 3 weeks inside his world, is that the position he's offering her isn't administrative. It's marital. A formal arrangement, documented, legally binding, designed to give her specific standing inside his organization and specific protection under the structures that govern it. He needs a wife the way a fortress needs a wall, not for love, but for what it signals to everyone watching. When she finds out, she doesn't scream. She sits very still in the chair across from him, in his study, and looks at the papers and looks at him and says, "You could have just told me." "Yes," Marcus says, "but then you would have said no." "I'm going to say no anyway." "Are you?" She doesn't. The math still doesn't work any other way. Theo is out there somewhere, and she doesn't have any other plays, and Marcus Vane, whatever else he is, has not lied to her yet. She signs the papers at midnight in a house that costs more than her entire block, while the rain outside finally stops. Part 2. The Escalation. The estate sits 12 miles outside the city, behind a gate that registers as a private residence on every map and a fortress on every instinct. Nora moves into it the way water moves into a foreign container, taking the shape of the space while remaining entirely itself. She expected the luxury. She didn't expect the discipline. Marcus Vane runs his household the way he runs everything else, with a precision that borders on architectural, meals at specific times, staff who know their lanes, a schedule that builds in accountability without surveillance. He doesn't watch her. He doesn't need to. She's already figured out that the walls themselves have eyes, but he never once uses them to remind her that she's watched. What catches her off guard is that he's fair, not kind. She doesn't make that mistake. But every person in that house, from the man at the gate to the woman who manages his accounts, moves with the particular confidence of someone who knows exactly where they stand. No one walks on eggshells. No one flinches. In Dorchester, Nora learned to read a room for violence the way other people read it for weather. This room reads clean. She starts to understand the organization by understanding its rhythms. Marcus meets with a rotating cast of men she quickly learns to categorize. Suppliers, lawyers, local politicians who need something laundered through respectability, bosses from neighboring networks maintaining whatever fragile peace currently governs Boston's underworld. She watches these meetings from the edges of rooms she's been placed in deliberately, understanding that her presence is the message, that her composure is the signal he's sending. She's very good at composure. What she is less good at is ignoring what doesn't add up. 3 weeks in, she notices something wrong with the numbers. Not because she's been given access to anything sensitive. She hasn't. But she worked 2 jobs through community college accounting classes for a year and a half before money ran out. And she has the specific gift of someone who taught herself to balance impossible books. She sees patterns in what's missing as clearly as in what's there. The gambling network that caught Theo isn't a peripheral operation. It's extensive. More extensive than a single crew should be running, with more reach than it should have into neighborhoods that belong to other organizations. The money flowing through it is too clean too fast. Someone is running a parallel structure beneath Marcus's feet, and Marcus doesn't know. She sits with this for 4 days before she decides what to do with it. The man she's identified as the likely architect is Dominic Rourke, Marcus's underboss, 46, with the smooth affect of a man who has never been genuinely surprised in his adult life. He runs the day-to-day with a competence that Marcus clearly trusts, and he moves through the estate with the particular ease of someone who has already mentally redecorated it. Nora watches him watching Marcus and understands. Rourke doesn't just want more. He thinks he's already been cheated out of what should be his. She brings it to Marcus on a Thursday evening, after dinner, when the house has gone quiet, and the two of them have fallen into the specific uncomfortable rhythm of people who share space and almost nothing else. She lays out what she's found, not accusation, evidence. The specific kind of cold accounting that doesn't require anyone to be believed. Marcus listens without interrupting. When she finishes, the silence in the room is a different kind than the silence before she spoke. "You found this," he says. "The patterns were there. My people didn't find it. Your people were looking at the books they were given." He studies her across the table and she watches something shift in him. Not softening, exactly. A recalibration. Like a calculation that just came back different than expected. "Why are you telling me this?" he says. "You could have taken it to Rourke, made a deal." "Rourke," Nora says, "is the reason my brother spent 2 years in debt to people who would break his hands over $400. Whatever he's building, it isn't good for anyone who isn't him." Marcus looks at the papers she's laid out. Then he looks at her. "I need to verify this," he says. "I know," she says. "Don't use anyone who reports to Rourke." The list of people who don't report to Rourke, it turns out, is shorter than it should be. This is itself a kind of confirmation. The next 2 weeks are the most dangerous of Nora's life, and she spends most of them in the house, cooking meals she doesn't eat and waiting for something to break. Marcus begins running a parallel investigation she isn't told the details of. She reads the temperature of the estate the way she read the diner, by watching who looks at whom, by the specific tension that settles into shoulders when the wrong people share the same room. Rourke begins to sense something. She can see it in the way he watches her at dinner now. Not warmly, calculating. He thought she was furniture Marcus had imported. He's starting to wonder if she's something else. She tells Marcus, he knows something is wrong. He just doesn't know it's me. How long do we have? Less than we need, Nora says. She's right, but not in the way she expected. Part 3. The Point of No Return. Theo surfaces on a Monday morning at 7:14, calling from a number Nora doesn't recognize, his voice doing that specific thing it does when he's trying not to sound terrified and failing completely. I'm okay, he says first, which means he isn't. Where are you? A pause. Background noise she can't place. Nor, I think someone's been watching me. She keeps her voice flat and even. How long? Since, I don't know, days, maybe longer. Another pause. I saw Rourke's guy, the one they call Briggs. I saw him on my street. Nora processes this in the space of a single breath. Rourke isn't running just a surveillance play. He's positioning pieces. And Theo, reckless, terrified, entirely unequipped for any of this, is the most obvious lever anyone could pull to move her or Marcus. Don't go back to your apartment, she says. Don't call anyone else. Stay on that phone. She goes to Marcus. What follows is the conversation that makes the ones before it look like small talk. Marcus lays out what his investigation has confirmed. Rourke's operation goes back 4 years, predating Nora by a long margin, predating most of the current structure. He's been building a separate network using Marcus's infrastructure as cover, the gambling debts, the leverage, the street-level reach, while giving Marcus just enough legitimate return to avoid suspicion. The number of families caught in it is staggering. The number of those families who know who's actually running the machine is 0. He was going to let you take the fall, Nora says. Eventually, Marcus says, once he had enough in place, and now he knows you're looking. Now he knows I'm looking. She sees it then. The shift from investigation to countdown. Rourke isn't going to wait for Marcus to act. He's going to move first, and he's going to use Theo to do it, because Theo is the cleanest pressure point available. If Theo disappears, Marcus either has to break cover to protect him, which exposes how much he knows, or watch Nora fracture, which neutralizes her. Neither option is acceptable. Nora says, "We can't wait anymore." Marcus says, "I know. I want to be in the room when it happens." He looks at her across a silence that costs him something. In 4 weeks, she has become something to him that he didn't budget for. Not an asset exactly, not a liability, something more complicated than either. A person whose particular kind of intelligence he trusts, which is rarer in his world than gold. "No," he says. "Marcus, not because I think you can't handle it," he says, and the specificity of that stops her. Because if Rourke has his people watching us, and they see you move, they'll take Theo before we can get to him. She sits with that. He's right, and she hates that he's right. Then what do I do? She says, and it comes out rawer than she intended. Stay visible, Marcus says. Stay in this house. Be exactly what Rourke thinks you are. What does he think I am? A woman who's in over her head, Marcus says, and not a threat. She doesn't answer that. But something moves across her face, not offense, something colder than offense. And Marcus sees it, and she watches him make a decision about her in real time. "I'll get your brother," he says. "I give you my word." She has learned in 4 weeks that Marcus Vane's word is the most solid currency in his world. She holds on to that when everything else starts moving fast. It starts moving fast the next morning. Theo is taken at 6 a.m., walking to a convenience store 2 blocks from where he'd been hiding. Nora gets the call from a number she recognizes, one of Marcus's outer network men, voice tight. And then she gets silence from Marcus himself, which means he's already running and there's no room in the operation for her voice in his ear. Rourke sends a message at 8 o'clock, not to Marcus, to Nora. A photograph of Theo, zip-tied to a chair, alive and terrified, holding a piece of paper with an address and a time. The message attached says only, "Come alone. If Vane moves, the boy goes first." Nora reads this message 3 times. Then she does what Rourke, in all his careful planning, never once considered she would do. She calls Marcus's accountant, not Marcus, not anyone who reports up the chain, but the 62-year-old woman who has managed Marcus's legitimate holdings for 11 years and who, Nora has correctly identified, is the single most trusted person in his world who isn't part of his operational structure. I need to get a message to Marcus without using any channel Rourke might be monitoring, Nora says. Right now. A pause. What kind of message? The kind that tells him exactly where Rourke is going to be in 4 hours, Nora says, and exactly why Rourke thinks I'll be walking in alone. The accountant is quiet for one long second. Can you write it in under 2 minutes? Yes, Nora says. She writes it in 90 seconds. Part 4. The Climax. The address is a decommissioned freight depot in East Boston, the kind of space that appears in city records under a holding company that traces back to a shell that traces back to nothing. Rourke chose it the way a man chooses a grave. Private, sufficient, already forgotten. Nora drives herself. This is the part that Rourke will read as desperation. A woman alone, no backup, operating on grief and fear. Let him read it that way. She has made a career of being read as less than she is. She's wired. Not by Marcus's people. She didn't have time and couldn't risk the channels. By herself, with the audio recorder on her phone placed against the inner seam of her jacket, and the phone itself live streaming to a secure number the accountant provided. Everything that happens in that building from the moment she walks in will exist on a server in 3 locations before she takes another breath. She isn't sure it's enough. She goes anyway. Rourke is waiting for her in the main floor of the depot, where the light comes through high broken windows and columns that hit the concrete and die. He has 6 men with him. Theo is in a chair 10 feet back, hands still bound, a cut above his eye that wasn't in the photograph. He sees Nora, and something breaks across his face that she doesn't have room to look at right now. Rourke is almost avuncular. It's the affect of a man who's already won, or believes he has. I wasn't sure you'd come, he says. Yes, you were, Nora says. He smiles at that, allows it. Where's Vane? I don't know. True, technically, she knows where he's supposed to be. She doesn't know if the message got through. Rourke reads her the way he's been reading her since she arrived at the estate, as a woman out of her depth, operating on feeling rather than strategy. He doesn't see the recorder. He doesn't see the stream. He doesn't see that she's been cataloging everything in the room since she walked through the door. The positions of his men, the exits, the structural columns that would provide cover, the distance between her and Theo. She needs him to talk. Not for closure. She doesn't need closure. For the record. You built the gambling network, she says. Not a question. 11 years, Rourke says, with the satisfaction of a man who hasn't had an audience in a long time. Vane never looked at what was underneath him. That was always his flaw. He thought loyalty was structural. He thought if the top looked clean, the bottom didn't matter. And the families? The people caught in the debt cycle? Leverage is leverage, he shrugs. They made choices. Theo made choices too, Nora says. He was 20 years old. So were a lot of them, Rourke says, and the ease of it, the complete comfort with what he's describing, tells her everything about how long he's been operating this way. She gets another 4 minutes out of him. He's good. She can see why Marcus trusted him, see the intelligence beneath the justification. But he wants to be witnessed, and she gives him that, and he takes it. Then the doors blow in. Not Marcus's people. Federal agents, 8 of them through the south entrance, 4 through the north, tactical gear and credentials, and the particular controlled aggression of people executing a warrant they've had ready for weeks. The accountant, it turns out, had a contact Nora wasn't told about. The message she sent carried enough documented evidence to trigger a pre-existing federal investigation that had been waiting for precisely this kind of opening. Rourke goes very still. His men don't. 3 of them move toward exits, which is the wrong call, because the exits are already covered. 2 others make the calculation faster and put their hands up. The 6th one, the one closest to Theo, raises his weapon. Nora is already moving. She isn't a fighter. She's never been a fighter. That's not what she is. But she is someone who has spent 24 years navigating situations by reading them faster than the other person, and she gets to Theo and gets the chair down and gets them both behind the column before the man's gun clears the holster. The shot goes into concrete. Federal agents respond with a volume that ends the conversation quickly. Rourke is on his knees with his hands behind his head when Marcus walks through the south door. He didn't come to fight. He came to witness. He looks at Rourke the way you look at something you trusted that turned out to be hollow. Not rage, something older and quieter than rage. And Rourke looks up at him and understands, maybe for the first time, that Marcus isn't the liability he calculated. He's the consequence. Nora comes out from behind the column with Theo against her side. His wrists finally cut free, his whole body shaking with the specific tremors of someone running on adrenaline and shame. She looks across the depot at Marcus. He looks back at her. Neither of them speaks. There's nothing to say yet that would fit inside the space available. The agents process the scene. The stream is already uploaded. Rourke's lawyers will get the call within the hour. But the documentation, 11 years of parallel empire building, 163 identified debt victims, 3 shell companies, and a network of corrupted record keepers, is already in federal hands. Theo cries in the car on the way out, full, ugly, uncontrolled sobbing that he doesn't try to stop. And Nora drives and doesn't tell him it's okay, because it isn't okay, and he knows that, and she respects him enough not to say it. She says, "You're alive." He nods. "That's where we start," she says. It's Part 5, The Resolution. The federal case against Dominic Rourke takes 11 months to build to indictment, and during those 11 months, the world Nora moved into quietly unmakes and remakes itself. Marcus cooperates with the investigation in ways that cost him, specifically and concretely. 3 operations that existed in legal gray area go dark. 2 relationships with men who preferred the gray area go with them. He does this without theater, without the public performance of transformation. He simply stops doing the things that were wrong, the way a man closes accounts he's been meaning to close. He also begins the work of dismantling the gambling network, not burning it down, which would scatter the victims further, dismantling, carefully, with the specific attention of someone trying to understand exactly how much damage was done. He identifies 119 families caught in the debt cycle Rourke built. He works through intermediaries, lawyers, social service organizations, a financial consulting firm that owes him more favors than it can count, to return what can be returned and cancel what can't. He doesn't do this because it's good strategy. He does it because Nora asked him to, the night after the depot, sitting across from him in the kitchen of the estate, while Theo slept on the couch in the next room. "This is what I need," she said, and he said, "All right." That was the first time she understood that he wasn't performing decency. He was trying to locate it. Theo checks himself into a residential program in the spring, not because anyone makes him, because he sits across from Nora over coffee one morning and says, with a directness she hasn't heard from him since he was a kid, "I think I need to actually fix this. Not just stop, fix it." She doesn't tell him she's proud of him. She has never been that kind of sister, the kind who narrates the moment. She puts her hand over his on the table and squeezes once, and that's enough. He goes. He stays. He calls her on Sundays. She visits him on a Thursday in April when the city is almost warm and the trees along the facility's walking path are doing that particular early spring thing where they're not quite green but you can see it coming. They walk for an hour and don't talk about any of it. Not the debt, not Rourke, not the depot. And instead Theo tells her about a GED prep class he's started and a guy in his cohort who's teaching him chess, and Nora listens with the specific relief of someone who has been holding their breath for a very long time and is finally, carefully, beginning to let it go. The marriage agreement sits in Marcus's desk drawer for 6 months after the depot. Neither of them mentions it. It's become something else by then. Not a contract, not an arrangement, but a thing they're both aware of without quite being able to describe. He tears it up on a Wednesday without ceremony and puts it in front of her. "You should have the original," he says. She looks at the pieces, looks at him. "This was always your call," he says. "It should have been your call from the beginning. I'm sorry that it wasn't." She doesn't perform surprise. She has known, for several months, that this was the version of him underneath the version she met in her doorway. The man who waits. The man who means what he says because he never says more than he means. What happens to the organization, she says. It becomes what I should have built in the first place, he says. Construction. Real estate development. I have the capital and the connections. The rest is just paperwork. And the people who've been with you, they go where they want, he says. Anyone who wants to come into the legitimate operation, I make room. Anyone who wants something else, I help them find it. He pauses. Nobody gets left holding the cost of my transition. She believes him. She's earned the right to that belief. I'm not leaving, she says. He goes still. I want to be clear about something, she says. I'm not staying because of the debt. I'm not staying because I don't have anywhere else to go. I could go anywhere. I'm staying because you're the most honest person I've been close to in my adult life, and I didn't expect that, and I don't want to walk away from it. The silence between them is different from every silence before it. Easier, like a room that's been open to air. That might be the most useful thing anyone's ever said to me, Marcus says. Don't get sentimental, she says, but she's almost smiling, and he can see it. What? The wedding is small, not modest. Marcus doesn't do modest, but small. 30 people in a rented space in the South End that used to be a textile warehouse, and still has the bones of something built to last. The accountant cries. Theo stands at the front of the room in a suit that actually fits him for the first time in his life. And when Nora walks in, he doesn't manage to hold it together, and neither does she for about 4 seconds. Then she does. She's always been good at that. The vows they exchange are ones they wrote themselves. Not romantic in the conventional sense, not full of language about forever and destiny. Direct. Specific. The kind of promises that name exactly what they mean and leave nothing open to later interpretation. She promises to tell him the truth, even when the truth is inconvenient. He promises to hear it, even when it costs him something. The room is quiet enough that everyone hears it clearly. It isn't a performance. That's why it lands the way it does. 18 months after the night 3 black SUVs parked in her Dorchester street, Nora Callahan sits in the office of Vane Development Group on the 7th floor of a building in the financial district, working through a cost analysis for a mixed-income housing project in Roxbury that Marcus's company is co-developing with the city. The work is real. The numbers are honest. The building, when it goes up, will house 240 families. Marcus walks in at noon, sets coffee on her desk, looks over her shoulder at the spreadsheet and says, "You moved the contingency line." "It was in the wrong column," she says. "I know," he says. "I was going to fix it later." "I fixed it now." "I can see that." He straightens. A pause. "Rourke's sentencing is tomorrow." "I know." "You don't have to be there." "I know," she says again. "She'll be there. Not for Rourke. She doesn't have anything left for Rourke. But for the 119 families who gave statements, for the record, for the specific satisfaction of watching something finished close properly. She's good at that too, recognizing when something is finished and letting it be. She clicks through to the next page of the spreadsheet, and Marcus picks up the second chair and pulls it beside hers, and they work through the rest of the afternoon like that, side by side, building something that will still be standing long after all of it is gone. Outside, Boston gets on with its business, loud and wet and perpetually rebuilding itself, the way cities do, the way people do, one block at a time. Nora signs the papers at midnight and doesn't sleep. She lies in the guest room they've given her. 3rd floor, east wing, a bed that costs more than 3 months of her rent in Dorchester, and stares at the ceiling while the house settles around her with the particular quiet of a place that's never had to worry about noise complaints. The sheets are the kind of soft that takes money to manufacture. The window looks out over a garden that's manicured even in the dark. Everything in this room costs more than everything she owns, and she is acutely, physically aware of that gap, the way you're aware of a bruise you keep pressing. She didn't cry when she signed. She won't cry now. Crying is for when you have the luxury of falling apart, and Nora Callahan has not had that luxury in a very long time. She thinks about Theo instead. Somewhere out there in the city, in whatever hole he's gone to ground in, Her brother is either sleeping or not sleeping, either alive or not alive, and there is nothing she can do about it until morning. She takes that fact and puts it in the part of her chest where she keeps things she can't fix yet, and she breathes around it, and eventually something close to sleep finds her. She wakes at 5:40 to the sound of the house already moving. There is a coffee service outside her door. Actual silver tray, porcelain cup, a small card with her name written in handwriting she doesn't recognize. She takes the coffee and leaves the card and stands at the window watching two men she hasn't met yet do a slow perimeter walk around the garden below. They move like people who've done it 10,000 times. No wasted motion, no conversation. She drinks the coffee and starts paying attention. The estate maps itself to her over the next 3 days, the way unfamiliar cities do. First the broad shapes, then the corridors, then the specific human geography of who moves where and when and why. The staff is small by the standards of the house. A property manager named Sutton, who runs logistics with the focused affect of someone constitutionally allergic to inefficiency. 2 rotating shifts of security, 6 men total, whose schedules she decodes by the 3rd morning. A woman named Ida, who manages the kitchen and does not make small talk and makes the best coffee Nora has ever consumed without once being asked to. There are others she catches glimpses of. An accountant who comes Tuesdays and Thursdays and takes a specific corner table in the library and doesn't look up when anyone passes. But the house operates on a principle of intentional invisibility. People do their jobs and disappear back into the structure. Marcus himself is a study in controlled exposure. He is present at breakfast, always, without exception, and available in his study from 8 until noon, and then gone for the afternoon into meetings she isn't given the details of, and back by 7 unless something pulls him later. He eats dinner in the main room when he's home and doesn't perform conversation but doesn't withhold it either. He asks her questions that are specific rather than social. Not how are you settling in, but is there anything in the room that needs to be changed? Not are you comfortable, but do you know how to reach Sutton if something comes up? Practical, direct. The language of someone who communicates in logistics because he's learned that logistics is the only language that doesn't get misread. She answers in the same register. It's easier than she expected. What she doesn't expect is Dominic Rourke. She meets him on the 4th day, when Marcus brings her into a working lunch with 3 of his senior people, an introduction that's been framed to her as routine, a matter of her being seen in context before anyone draws the wrong conclusions from her presence. She understands the logic. She dresses for it. Nothing expensive, nothing that tries too hard, the specific neutrality of someone who knows what the room requires. Rourke arrives last, which she suspects is not an accident. He is a substantial man, not physically imposing but weighted somehow, the way certain rooms are weighted. You feel him before you fully register him. He has the face of someone who was probably decent-looking 20 years ago and has since replaced that with something more durable. He wears his authority lightly enough that you might miss it, which is how she knows it's real. He looks at her the way she's been looked at in a lot of rooms. The assessment is fast and nearly invisible. What is this? Where does it fit? What does it want? Most men who look at her that way conclude not a threat and move on. Rourke's eyes do something more complicated. They stay a half-second longer than the assessment requires. She files that. Nora, Marcus says. Dominic Rourke, he runs operations. I know who she is, Rourke says, and his voice is the warm, textured kind that makes it hard to locate the edge underneath. He extends his hand and she shakes it, and his grip is exactly calibrated, firm enough to be respectful, brief enough not to establish anything. I didn't realize you'd be joining us, she says. Marcus thought it was time. Rourke looks at Marcus with the ease of a man who's had 10,000 such looks with him. She settling in all right? Ask her, Marcus says. Rourke smiles. Fair enough. He turns back to Nora. Settling in all right. Everything's been clear so far, she says. I'm still learning the shape of things. The shape of things, Rourke repeats, and there's something in the rhythm of it. Not mockery, something more patient than mockery. Something that suggests he has all the time in the world to watch her learn. That's a good way to put it. The lunch is professional and reveals nothing she wasn't already building toward on her own. But she watches Rourke through it, the way he frames things for Marcus, the specific phrasing he uses when he's steering versus reporting, the micro adjustments he makes when Marcus pushes back on something versus when he accepts the pushback. She has worked in service for 6 years. She knows how to read a room of people who think they're being watched by someone who isn't really watching. What she reads is this: Rourke doesn't defer to Marcus. He performs deference for Marcus, which is not the same thing, and the performance is good enough that you'd have to be looking for the seam to find it. She is looking. She files that too. The week that follows is the week she begins to understand what Marcus has actually built, and what's been built beneath it without his knowledge. It starts with the invoices. She isn't given access to anything sensitive. She isn't given access to anything at all, officially. She has her room, her standing in the household, a credit card that covers personal expenses, and Marcus's tacit permission to move through the common spaces as she chooses. But the library has a functional desktop that the accountant uses on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and on a Wednesday afternoon when the house is quiet and Sutton is off property and she has nothing to do but think, she sits down at it out of pure instinct. The desktop itself has nothing accessible without credentials, but the physical desk has a stack of courier envelopes, the kind that come through legitimate business channels, addressed to the Property Management LLC that holds the estate, and several of them are open, their contents partially sorted, the way they'd be left by someone who was called away in the middle of something. She doesn't touch them. She just looks at what's visible from where she's sitting. And what's visible is wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not forged signature, fake delivery wrong. Subtly wrong. The kind of wrong that only registers if you spent a year and a half in accounting courses learning to look at where the numbers breathe and where they hold their breath. An invoice from a property management company in Somerville for maintenance services rendered at 3 addresses she doesn't recognize. Not unusual on its face, but the billing structure is internal to an extent that an external vendor shouldn't have, which means whoever generated this invoice has access to the LLC's cost codes, which means they're not an external vendor at all. A service agreement from a logistics firm dated 16 months ago with a renewal clause that auto-executed 4 months ago, billed to a line item that maps to operational overhead in a way that doesn't match what she knows about how this house actually runs. She's very still for about 30 seconds. Then she gets up and makes herself a cup of coffee and goes back to her room and sits on the edge of the bed and thinks. She does not, yet, say anything to anyone. She watches instead. She adds a layer to her observation of the estate. Not just the people and their rhythms, but the paper that moves through it, the digital traffic visible from shared spaces, the specific texture of how business enters and exits this place. She is good at invisible attention. She has always been good at it. Over the next 9 days, the picture assembles itself. The gambling network that took Theo isn't a fringe operation. She knew that going in, Marcus acknowledged it when he laid out the scope of the debt, the reach of the people Theo owed. What she didn't know, what she begins to understand with the cold, sinking certainty of someone who's been hoping the math was wrong and has finally run it too many times to deny it, is that the network is structural, not a crew running a side operation, not an opportunistic expansion. A parallel organization built on Marcus's foundation, his infrastructure, his protection, his street-level credibility, that has been generating its own revenue and building its own leverage for years. She identifies 4 shell companies in 12 days of looking at nothing but what's visible from common spaces. She estimates, conservatively, that the network is moving money through at least 24 gambling fronts across the metro area, most of them targeting exactly the demographics that can least afford it. Not high rollers, not people with disposable income. Theo's people. Broke, desperate young men who got in over their heads at 19 and found out too late that the debt doesn't disappear. It compounds, and it attaches, and eventually someone comes to collect it in ways that have nothing to do with money. She thinks about the 119. She doesn't know the number yet. She won't know it for months. But she feels the shape of it. She knows it's large. And she knows whose name traces back to every company she's found. She doesn't go to Marcus immediately. She goes the night she finds the 5th shell company, a real estate holding LLC registered in Delaware. Its only listed asset, a warehouse in East Boston she has no way to identify the use of. Its signatory, an attorney who also appears in the records of 3 of the other 4 companies she's already flagged. She has no formal documentation. She has a legal pad covered in notes she wrote in a handwriting small enough that you'd need to know you were looking to read it. And she has 12 days of pattern recognition she can't prove in any courtroom. She goes to Marcus because she doesn't have anywhere else to take it. It is 11 o'clock at night and he is in his study with the door open, which she has learned means available, and she stands in the doorway until he looks up from whatever he's reading. "I need to show you something," she says. He reads her face. He sets the papers down. She lays it out. Not emotionally. She doesn't have room for emotional right now. But precisely. The way she'd lay out a discrepancy to a shift manager, walking through the evidence in the order she found it, naming the specific anomalies without overstating what they mean. She keeps her voice level. She watches his face. Marcus listens without interrupting. This is one of the things she's already cataloged about him. He doesn't perform listening. He actually does it, which is rarer than it should be. When she finishes, he doesn't speak for long enough that she starts to wonder if she's misread him completely, if this is going to be the moment the floor drops out. Then he says, "How long have you been looking at this?" 12 days. From common spaces. "I didn't touch anything that wasn't already visible." He's quiet again. Not angry. Something more interior than anger, the specific look of a man running calculations he doesn't like the results of. "You found 5 companies," he says. "That I can trace with what's accessible to me. There may be more." "There are more," he says, and the flatness of it, the absence of surprise, tells her something. "You knew," she says. "I knew something was wrong," he says. "I've known for 8 months. I don't know the shape of it." He looks at her notes. "I haven't been able to find the center." "The center is whoever controls the attorney," she says. "All 5 companies trace back to the same signatory. That's not coincidence. That's architecture." He picks up her legal pad. He reads it the way she's learned he reads things. Front to back, no skimming, giving each line the full weight of his attention. "I told you I needed someone the room wouldn't clock," he says. "I know." "I didn't tell you it was for this." "No," she says. "You didn't?" He sets the pad down and looks at her. "Why did you bring this to me and not to Rourke?" She had prepared for this question. She was not prepared for how directly he would ask it. "Because Rourke is comfortable," she says. "Not with the situation, with his position in it. There's a difference. And the way he looked at me when we met wasn't curiosity." She pauses. "It was inventory." Marcus is very still. "I'm not accusing him," she says. "I don't have enough for that. I'm telling you what I observed." "What you observed," he says slowly. "I've spent 6 years in service work. I know how people look at things they own versus things they're evaluating for ownership. Rourke looked at me like the second one." She meets his eyes. "He didn't look at you like anything, because he doesn't have to. He's already done his evaluation of you." The silence that follows is the longest of any silence they've shared in the 12 days she's been in this house. She holds it. She learned that from the diner, too. The customer who's about to say something real goes quiet first, and the worst thing you can do is fill it. Marcus stands. He goes to the window. Not theatrically, just the specific restlessness of a man who needs to move while he thinks, and stands with his back to her looking out at the dark garden. "If you're right," he says, "I know. If you're right, I need to verify it without using anyone who might report back to him." "Yes." That's a shorter list than it should be. "I know," she says again. He turns around. His face has done something she hasn't seen it do before. Not softened exactly, but dropped a layer of the controlled distance he maintains as a matter of professional survival. What's underneath it is something complicated and not entirely comfortable to look at. A man who has built his world on the reliability of the people around him and is beginning to understand, concretely, what it means if that reliability has been hollowed out. "You've been here 12 days, he says. "Yes." "And you found this." The patterns were there to find. "My people were looking at what they were given access to," she says. "I was looking at what was visible. Those aren't the same categories." He looks at her legal pad again. At the careful, close handwriting, the logic chains, the specific places she's circled where one company's records bleed into another's in ways that weren't meant to be traceable. "All right," he says. "All right what?" "All right, I'm going to verify it. He picks up the pad. Can I keep this? It's your house, she says. He almost smiles at that. Almost. Go to sleep, Nora. She goes upstairs. She doesn't sleep. She lies in the expensive sheets in the dark and listens to the house and thinks about Theo, and thinks about the attorney whose name traces through 5 companies, and thinks about the specific way Rourke smiled at her across the lunch table. Patient, warm, the ease of a man who has already decided how a situation ends and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. She is not furniture. She is not a placeholder. She is not the thing Rourke looked at and categorized as peripheral and temporary, and not a variable that requires management. She is the thing that found the 5th company, and the thing that walked it directly to the one man in this building Rourke hasn't fully calculated. She closes her eyes. Marcus's verification takes 9 days. She knows it's happening because the texture of the house changes. Barely, in ways that would be invisible to anyone not tuned to it, but she is tuned to it. Men she hasn't seen before appear for brief meetings that occur in rooms with closed doors. The accountant who comes Tuesdays and Thursdays arrives on a Saturday, stays 4 hours, leaves with nothing in her hands that she didn't arrive with. Marcus is in his study until 2 in the morning on 3 separate nights, and she can see the light under the door when she gets up for water. And each time she walks past without stopping because he doesn't need an audience, he needs time. Rourke comes to the house on the 6th day of the 9. Routine, she gathers. He comes twice a week, regular as anything. She is in the kitchen when he arrives, and she stays in the kitchen, moving through the motions of making herself lunch with the deliberate calm of someone who has decided that visibility is its own kind of cover. He finds her there. You cook? He says from the doorway. When I have to, she says. She doesn't turn around. She hears him come into the room, the particular cadence of it, not aggressive, not tentative, the specific ease of a man comfortable in every space he enters. He pours himself coffee from the carafe on the counter, which is either a territorial thing or a familiarity thing, and she can't tell which yet. You've been quiet, he says. I'm always quiet. Not what I heard. He leans against the counter across from where she's working. She can feel him looking at her, that same patient inventory she clocked the first day. Marcus said you're observant. I pay attention, she says. To what? She turns around then, because turning away was a choice that served its purpose, and now continuing to turn away would read as avoidance, and she doesn't have anything to hide specifically. To whatever's in the room, she says. It's a hard habit to break when you've spent enough time in service work. Rourke nods. Something moves across his face that she can't entirely read. Not displeasure, not quite reassurance either. What do you make of the room so far? It's a well-run house, she says. Clear structures. People know what they're supposed to do. And Marcus? He's fair, she says, and watches that land. Rourke takes a slow drink of his coffee, sets the cup down. Fair, he repeats. That's an interesting word for it. What word would you use? He smiles at her, warm, wide, entirely real on the surface. I'd say he's earned what he has, which isn't the same thing as fair, but it usually gets there. She smiles back, smaller than his. I'll keep that in mind. He leaves 10 minutes later, and she stands in the kitchen listening to the sound of the house resettling around his departure and lets out a breath she didn't know she was holding. On the 9th day, Marcus calls her into his study. You were right, he says. He doesn't sit. He stands behind his desk with her legal pad in front of him and 3 other documents she doesn't recognize. And his face has the controlled flatness of someone who has done the work of absorbing information he didn't want and is now operating from what's on the other side of it. How much? She says. 7 companies, not 5. The other 2 use a different attorney, but they link through property addresses. He pauses. The warehouse in East Boston appears in 3 of them. What's in the warehouse? I don't know yet. How many people in the gambling network? More than 100 active debt cases. The muscle in his jaw moves. The youngest is 19. She takes that in, puts it in the part of her chest that's getting crowded. Does Rourke know you're looking? Not yet. How long before he does? Marcus looks at her directly. Less time than I need, he says, and the echo of what she told him 12 days ago, less than we need, registers in both their faces at the same time. Then we're already behind, she says. Yes. What do you need from me? He is quiet for a moment. Whatever calculation he's running, it's not a simple one. She can see it in the specific way he holds himself, the weight of a man who is used to making decisions quickly and is making himself slow down because the cost of a wrong one is too high. I need you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing, he says. Stay visible. Stay in this house. Be exactly what everyone in this organization thinks you are. Which is what? A woman who's still learning the shape of things, he says. She thinks about Rourke in the kitchen, about the patience in his eyes, the warmth that sits on top of something colder, the way he said fair like it was a child's word for a complicated concept. He's going to move before you're ready, she says. Probably. And when he does, he'll use Theo. Marcus doesn't answer that immediately, which is its own kind of answer. She has known it for days, the logical endpoint of Rourke's architecture, the obvious lever for anyone who needs to move her or destabilize Marcus's judgment. Theo is out there in the city, unprotected, still carrying the original debt on paper, even though it's been verbally waived, and Rourke has access to every record that debt ever generated. I need you to understand something, Marcus says. If Rourke finds out we know, if he gets even a rumor of it, the timeline compresses to days, maybe hours. Then we can't give him the rumor. No. What are you doing to find the center, she says. The actual person running the attorney, working on it. Marcus. She says his name the way she says a number that doesn't add up. Not angrily, just with the specific flatness of someone who needs the actual figure. How close are you? He looks at her for a long moment. Close enough to be dangerous, he says. Not close enough to act. She nods once. She turns toward the door, and she is almost through it when he says her name. Just her name, no sentence attached. And she stops. You found something I've been looking for 8 months, he says. In 12 days, from a guest room and a kitchen. She doesn't turn around. The patterns were there. They were there for my people too, he says. They didn't find them. She stands in the doorway and thinks about what to say to that, and what she lands on is nothing, because he isn't waiting for a response. He's just saying a true thing out loud because the room is private enough for it. She goes back to her floor. She is running through everything she knows about Rourke, his schedule, his habits, the specific way he uses the house. When her phone rings, the number is one she doesn't recognize, a Boston area code, and she answers it because unknowns can no longer be ignored. Nor. Theo's voice, rough and too quiet, like he's cupping the phone against his face. Nor, I think I'm being watched. She sits down on the edge of the bed. Her hand is completely steady. How long? I don't know. Days, maybe. I saw the same car twice on my block this morning. And last night, when I went out, there was a guy, big leather jacket. He wasn't buying anything from the bodega, he was just standing. Has anyone approached you? No. Nor, what's happening? I thought, you said the debt was... The debt is handled, she says. This isn't about the debt. A silence that tells her he understands that's worse. Then what is it about? She chooses her words with the precision of someone dismantling something live. You need to move. Don't go back to the apartment tonight. Is there somewhere you can go that no one you know knows about? My friend Danny has a place in Medford. We haven't talked in... Perfect. Someone you're not connected to anymore. Go there. Don't call anyone from your regular life. Don't use your bank card. Do you have cash? Like $80. That'll do for tonight. Call me from Danny's number when you get there. Nor. His voice drops. Are you okay? She almost laughs. The specific absurdity of Theo asking her that, Theo, who has spent the last 2 years being the thing she's been navigating around, almost breaks through the controlled surface she's been maintaining for 19 days straight. I'm fine, she says. Go. Now. She hangs up and sits very still for approximately 45 seconds, and in those 45 seconds she maps it out completely. Rourke has put someone on Theo. Not to move yet. If they were moving, Theo would already be gone. This is positioning. This is the preparation phase, the piece placement that happens before the board locks, and the game actually begins. Which means Rourke is closer to knowing than Marcus thinks. Which means the timeline Marcus described, days, maybe hours, is already wrong. Not because Marcus miscalculated, but because by the time he made that calculation, the clock had already started. She is on her feet and moving toward the door when her phone buzzes again. A text this time, from the same number she doesn't recognize. Not Theo's voice this time. A different message entirely. 3 words and an address. We should talk. She stares at the text for a long moment. The number is new, not one she's ever seen. But the phrasing is specific, the kind of specific that doesn't happen by accident. We should talk, not call me, not I have information. The grammar of it is the grammar of someone who knows her well enough to know that the direct approach is the only one that will work. She does not recognize the number. She recognizes the phrasing. She has heard Rourke use those exact 3 words in that exact construction twice. Once at the lunch table to Marcus, once in the hallway to a man whose name she didn't catch. And the cadence of it is specific enough that she is certain, in the particular way you're certain about things you can't prove yet, that the message is from him. Which means he isn't positioning Theo anymore. He has already decided to move, and he is offering her the chance to choose her side before he does. Her thumb hovers over the screen. The address is a cafe in Back Bay she's been to exactly once, years ago, with a woman from work who moved to Portland and never came back. Neutral ground. Public enough to be safe, private enough for what he wants to say. She screenshots the message, closes the app, and walks directly to Marcus's study. She doesn't knock. She pushes the door open and holds the phone out and watches his face as he reads it. He reads it once, reads it again, sets the phone down on the desk between them like it's something that might detonate. When did this come in, he says. 4 minutes ago. And Theo called before this? Yes. Marcus looks at the phone, looks at her. The controlled flatness she's used to seeing on his face has been replaced by something more exposed. Not panic. Nothing so simple as panic, but the specific expression of a man watching a timeline he was trying to manage collapse into a much shorter one. He knows, Marcus says. He knows something, she says. He doesn't know what you know, or that message would be to you, not me. He thinks you're the easier play. He thinks I'm scared and isolated and that an offer of protection is the one thing I can't turn down. She takes the phone back. He's been running that calculation since the first lunch. And were you going to go? Marcus says. Not accusatory, genuinely asking. She looks at him steadily. I'm standing in your study. Something shifts in his face, brief, controlled back into neutral almost immediately, but she sees it. He picks up his phone and makes a call she's not introduced to, short and quiet. 3 sentences that don't mean anything to her, but clearly mean something specific to the person on the other end. When he hangs up, he says, We moved tonight, not on Rourke. We don't have enough yet, but I'm pulling Theo somewhere I can protect him. He's already on his way to Medford. Medford's not far enough. He's already moving toward the door. I need 2 hours. Can you stay visible? Dinner table? Nowhere else? For 2 hours? She thinks about sitting at that dinner table with the knowledge that Rourke is out there making moves, that Theo is on a bus with $80 and a borrowed phone, that everything she's built in 19 days inside this house is balancing on what the next 2 hours produce. Yes, she says. After tonight, Marcus says, pausing in the doorway. Nothing about this stays quiet. You understand that? I know. Once he realizes you didn't take the meeting, I know, Marcus. She says it without heat, without drama. There's no version of tonight where I still have a clean exit. I made that choice when I came to your study the first time. He holds her gaze for one long moment. Then he nods. Once. The specific nod of a man who is revising his understanding of a situation, and moves. Nora goes downstairs. She sits at the dinner table. She eats. She keeps her hands completely still. Somewhere across the city, Rourke is waiting for a reply that will never come. And the clock between that silence and his next move is running, and there is nothing left to do but hold the line and let the night decide what kind of war this becomes. Rourke's reply comes at 9:47. Not a text, a photograph. Theo, sitting in the back of a car Nora doesn't recognize, his hands zip-tied in his lap, a cut above his left eye that wasn't there this morning, his face doing the specific thing it does when he's trying not to show how frightened he is and failing completely. Behind him, through the car window, Boston at night. Streetlights, wet pavement, no landmarks she can identify. Below the photograph, 4 words. You should have come. Nora is still at the dinner table when it arrives. She has been sitting here for an hour and 50 minutes, eating food she doesn't taste, maintaining the specific performance of a woman spending a quiet evening in a house that belongs to her husband, and the phone buzzes in her lap and she looks down, and the floor drops out of everything. She does not move. This is the most important thing she does in the next 30 seconds. She does not move, does not change the position of her body, does not let anything reach her face that didn't belong there before. The dining room has 2 staff in it. She doesn't know which ones report to Rourke. She has to assume all of them until she knows otherwise. She finishes the glass of water in front of her, sets it down, folds her napkin, stands with the unhurried calm of a woman who is done with dinner and going upstairs. And she walks out of the room and up the stairs and into her bedroom and closes the door, and then she is running. Not across the room, her legs won't do that, but inside, everything running at once, every calculation she has, because Theo is in that car, and Rourke has him, and Marcus has been gone for 1 hour and 50 minutes, and she doesn't have a number that reaches him directly, only through channels she's been told not to use unless it's an emergency. This is an emergency. She calls the number Sutton gave her the first week, the property manager, the one person in the house she has tentatively decided is structurally neutral, loyal to the estate rather than to any individual within it. It rings 4 times and goes to voicemail, and she hangs up and tries it again. And on the second ring, a woman picks up who is not Sutton. Who is this? Nora says. A pause. You should be asking who you are, the woman says, and hangs up. Nora stares at the phone. She calls the accountant. The Tuesday-Thursday woman, 62 years old, handles the legitimate holdings. The one person Marcus described to her 3 weeks ago as outside the operational structure, in a tone that she filed as meaning trustworthy, in a way the others aren't. The number is in her phone because Marcus put it there the first week without explanation, and she has never used it, and she uses it now. It rings twice. I was wondering when you'd call, the accountant says. Her name is Vera Cross, and her voice is the particular dry calm of someone who has been managing chaos-adjacent situations for long enough that the chaos itself has stopped registering as notable. They have my brother, Nora says. I know, Vera says. Marcus knows. He's trying to reach you through channels that have apparently been compromised. Where are you? My room. Stay there. Don't open the door for anyone except Marcus or me. There's a secondary exit through the east wing bathroom. Window to the maintenance roof, external ladder on the north face. Don't use it unless you hear the house alarm, in which case use it immediately. What's happening out there? Rourke moved faster than anticipated, Vera says, which means someone told him we were moving. The sentence lands like something physical. Someone told him, Nora repeats. Yes. Inside this operation. Yes. Vera's voice doesn't change. Which is why I need you to stay in that room and not trust anyone who comes to that door before Marcus gets back. Can you do that? Who is it? Nora says. Who told him? We don't know yet. Vera. We don't know yet, Vera says again, and this time the emphasis is a door closing. Stay in the room. I'll be there in 40 minutes. She hangs up. Nora sits on the edge of the bed with the phone in both hands and thinks about the shape of the last 24 hours and what it looks like if someone inside Marcus's operation has been feeding Rourke information. She thinks about the call she made to Sutton's number that a stranger answered. She thinks about Theo's surveillance. Days, maybe longer, he said, and the timeline of when Marcus began his verification run, and the specific calculation of whether Rourke could have known about the verification without knowing its exact contents. He didn't need the contents. He needed to know Marcus was looking. That was enough to start the clock. She sits very still and waits. Vera Cross arrives in 37 minutes, not 40, which tells Nora something about how fast she was already moving when she made the call. She is small and precise, with the particular economy of someone who stopped wasting motion sometime in her 40s and never started again. She comes through the bedroom door with a laptop bag over one shoulder and two phones in her hand and a look on her face that is not reassuring, but is at least honest. Marcus is 20 minutes out, she says. He's clean. He swept before he moved. The breach wasn't on his end. Then whose end? Nora says. Vera sets the laptop on the bed and opens it. She turns it to face Nora. On the screen is a communication log, internal, encrypted, the kind of format Nora doesn't have the background to fully parse, but can read well enough to see the timestamps and the routing codes and the three-letter identifier that appears in the sender field of 12 separate messages sent over the last 9 days. STN, Nora says. Sutton, Vera says. The property manager. The first number Nora called tonight. The woman she'd assessed as structurally neutral, loyal to the estate. Nora looks at the communication log and feels the specific cold of being wrong in a way that mattered. How long, she says. The earliest message we can trace is 14 months ago, Vera says. But the pattern suggests longer. He was careful. The early communications are clean enough that they could read as routine reporting. Routine to whom? That's the question. Vera closes the laptop. Because Sutton doesn't report to Rourke structurally. Sutton reports to Marcus, which means either Rourke recruited him specifically or Sutton has been Rourke's from the beginning, Nora says. Before Marcus, before the current structure. Vera looks at her with the expression of someone confirming a diagnosis they were hoping would come back different. Marcus built the estate operation around people Rourke recommended in the early years. He didn't have reason to question it. They were good at their jobs. Because Rourke needed them good at their jobs, Nora says, until he needed them good at something else. Yes. Nora stands up. She can't sit anymore. The room is too small for what she's thinking, and her body has decided that stillness is no longer available as an option. She walks to the window and looks out at the garden and thinks about the 9 days Marcus spent verifying her findings, the careful architecture of keeping it off Rourke's channels, and the single thread they didn't check, the property manager who runs every physical system in the house, including the internal network routing. Everything Marcus thought was off-channel ran through infrastructure Sutton controlled. He heard everything, she says. We believe so. The verification, the companies I identified, the conversation in the study. Yes. She turns around. He knew Marcus was coming for him 9 days ago. Yes, Vera says, which means Theo was never a reactive move. Taking your brother, that was already planned. Rourke has been 3 steps ahead of this since before you walked in the door. Nora absorbs this. She takes it apart and puts it back together and looks at what it means. And what it means is worse than what she thought, and what she thought was already bad enough to cost her sleep. The cafe, she says. The text he sent me. We should talk. A test, Vera says. He wanted to know if you'd tell Marcus. And when I didn't show, he knew you'd told Marcus, which confirmed that you're not a loose piece, you're operational, which changed his calculus. Vera's voice stays level, but something behind it isn't. He took Theo because he needs a lever that overrides your judgment, not Marcus's judgment, yours. Why mine specifically? Because Marcus can be outmaneuvered tactically. You can't be. You found what his people missed. He knows that now. Vera pauses. Rourke is not a man who leaves functional threats in play. The room goes quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when something true has been said that can't be taken back. He's going to kill me, Nora says. Not a question. Not performance. Just the flat arithmetic of it, run to its conclusion. Not if you're useful, Vera says. And not if Marcus moves first. Marcus doesn't have enough to move. He has more than he did this morning, Vera says, and opens the laptop again. What's on the screen this time is different. Not communication logs, financial records, the specific dense format of traced money flows, and at the center of it, a name Nora has never seen attached to any of the 7 shell companies she identified. Harlan Briggs. The man Theo saw on his street. The man Rourke calls his logistics coordinator and Marcus's organizational chart lists as mid-level field operations with no financial authority. Briggs controls the attorney, Vera says, not Rourke. Nora looks at her. Explain that. The attorney, the signatory on all 7 companies, takes instruction from a numbered account that traces to Briggs. Not to Rourke. Vera's finger moves across the screen. Rourke has operational control of the network, but the financial architecture was built by someone else, and Briggs is the bridge between Rourke's operation and the money. Which means Rourke doesn't own the whole thing, Nora says slowly. Which means Rourke has a partner he may or may not have told Marcus about, and that partner controls the financial instrument, which means even if Marcus takes Rourke out, the network doesn't fall, Nora says. Briggs just runs it from a different position, or surfaces as the primary, which was possibly the plan all along. Nora stares at the screen. She is rebuilding the architecture in her head. Not Rourke's solo play, not a simple underboss power grab, but something two-tiered, with Rourke as the visible face of the operation and Briggs as the financial core that can survive Rourke's removal. A succession plan built into the conspiracy itself. How long have you known this? She says. I confirmed it 40 minutes ago, Vera says. I've suspected it for 3 days. Does Marcus know? He will in... Vera checks her watch. 12 minutes. The door opens. Marcus comes in without knocking, which tells her everything about the current state of his internal protocols, and he looks at Vera first and then at Nora, and the specific way he looks at Nora, checking her the way you check something you were worried about while you were gone, registers somewhere under her sternum in a way she doesn't have time to examine. You got the photograph, he says. Yes. He's alive. I have eyes on the vehicle. We picked it up on traffic cameras coming out of Medford. He looks at Vera. You told her about Sutton? Yes, Vera says. And Briggs? Just now. Marcus moves to the desk and stands with his hands flat on it, looking at the laptop screen. She can see him doing what she's been doing, reassembling the structure with the new information, finding where it changes the shape of what he thought he was dealing with. This isn't a takeover play, he says. No, Vera says. It's a replacement, Nora says. He was never going to take what you built. He was going to let you burn and step into clean air. Marcus looks at her. With Briggs holding the money. Briggs holds the money, Nora says. Rourke takes the operational seat, except... She stops. Except what? Marcus says. She is running it again. The architecture, the specific distribution of control, the fact that Briggs controls the financial instrument and Rourke controls the operations, and neither one of them has full possession of the whole machine. They don't fully trust each other, she says. Rourke needs Briggs for the money. Briggs needs Rourke for the street-level structure. But the reason they split it that way isn't efficiency. It's insurance. Each one is holding leverage over the other. Marcus is very still. Which means, Nora continues, that if you pressure one of them hard enough, the other one doesn't hold. They're not a unified front. They're 2 people in a room with their backs to each other, and each one is afraid the other one moves first. The silence in the room is the particular quality of 3 people landing on the same conclusion at the same time. Briggs has Theo, Nora says. Not Rourke. Vera looks up sharply from the laptop. The photograph, Nora says. The car. Theo was supposed to be going to Medford, which means whoever picked him up knew where he was going before he got there. Sutton knew. He had access to my phone conversation through the house network. She pauses. But Sutton reports to Rourke, and Rourke sent me the photograph from a number I've never seen, which means he was routing through something off his regular channels. He routed through Briggs, which means Briggs has the physical asset, Marcus says. And Rourke is managing me, Nora says. The photograph, the text, the cafe offer, those are all Rourke's moves. He's keeping me focused on him while Briggs holds the thing that matters. Marcus looks at Vera. Can you locate Briggs? I've been trying to locate Briggs for 72 hours, Vera says flatly. He doesn't have a registered address, a vehicle in his own name, or a phone number that stays active longer than 4 days. He's very good at not being found. He's good at it, Nora says, because you've been looking for him in the places Rourke's network would look, through street contacts, through DMV records, through the channels that map to how this organization finds people. How else do you look? Marcus says. The financial instrument, Nora says. The attorney takes instruction from a numbered account. That account has to receive funds from somewhere. Briggs isn't running this on air. You find the account's inflows, you find where Briggs actually exists in the world. She looks at Vera. Can you trace inflows on the account you identified? Vera looks at the screen for a long moment. It'll take time I'm not sure we have. How much time? Hours, maybe more. And Theo, Marcus says quietly, does not have hours. The room holds that. 3 people in a bedroom in a house that's been compromised at its foundations, holding a picture of a problem that is larger and more carefully constructed than any of them knew 48 hours ago. And the specific arithmetic of it, the gap between what they know and what they need to know before they can move, is a gap that Theo is currently sitting inside of. Nora looks at the photograph on her phone. Theo's face, the cut above his eye, his hands in his lap. Behind him, Boston at night. She looks at it for a long time. Then she looks at Marcus. I'm going to take the meeting, she says. He goes very still. No. Rourke wants to talk to me. He's been trying to get me in a room since the first week. He thinks I'm the piece he can turn. She holds up a hand before Marcus can speak. I'm not saying I go alone. I'm not saying I go blind. I'm saying that while Vera traces the account and you work the traffic camera data on Theo's vehicle, I am the only one in this equation that Rourke will willingly move toward. He'll use you to get to me, Marcus says. Yes, she says, and while he's doing that, I'll be getting everything he says on record, and I'll be keeping his attention off whatever you're doing on the back end, and I'll be buying Vera the time she needs to find Briggs. She pauses. You said stay visible. You said be exactly what Rourke thinks I am. That was before he took Theo. It's more true now than it was then, she says. He took Theo because he needs me compliant. He needs me scared and isolated and willing to make a deal. If I show up at that cafe, I'm exactly the woman he's calculated I am. He'll relax. And a man who's relaxed tells you more than a man who's on guard. Nora. Marcus says her name with the weight of someone who is about to say something they don't want to say. If he decides you're more useful as leverage than as an informant, then I become leverage, she says, and you come get me, same way you're coming to get Theo. She looks at him steadily. You said you'd get him. I'm holding that. The silence between them is the most loaded one they've ever shared, and they have shared a great many loaded silences in 21 days. 2 conditions, Marcus says finally. Name them. You're wired, not your phone, hardware, properly placed, real-time feed to Vera. Agreed. And you don't go until I have eyes on at least one exit from that building. He looks at her. I need 20 minutes. Rourke's been waiting 4 hours already, she says. 20 minutes he won't notice. Marcus nods once. He picks up his phone and steps into the hallway, and she can hear his voice, low and specific, the precise cadence of a man issuing instructions he expects to be followed exactly. Vera opens a panel in her laptop bag and produces a device the size of a shirt button and a small roll of medical tape, and she looks at Nora with the flat practicality of someone who has done this before. Left side, Vera says, inner seam of whatever you're wearing. Audio range is about 40 feet in an enclosed space. Nora takes the device. How do I know it's working? You don't, Vera says. That's the part you have to trust. Nora looks at the device in her palm. She thinks about trust, what it costs, what it buys, the specific ledger she's been running since the night she signed papers at midnight and decided that Marcus Vane's word was the only currency in the room worth anything. She presses the device against the inner seam of her jacket. The medical tape holds. Marcus comes back in. He looks at Vera. North exit is covered. I've got 2 people on the roof of the building across the street. He looks at Nora. The moment anything moves wrong. I know, she says. Do you? He says. Because what I need you to understand is that there is no version of what happens in that cafe that's safe. What we're doing is trading controlled risk for uncontrolled risk, and I need you to know that clearly before you walk out that door. She looks at him. 21 days ago, she signed papers in this house because she didn't have another play. She doesn't sign things she doesn't mean, and she meant those papers in the only way that mattered, as a commitment to see it through, whatever through looked like. I know what I'm walking into, she says. Tell me. A man who thinks he's already won, she says, and a conversation I need to keep going long enough for you to find my brother. Marcus holds her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he steps aside from the doorway. She walks through it, down the stairs, and out into the night, and Boston receives her the way it always has, indifferently, loudly, in the rain. And she gets into the car Vera has arranged and rides toward the cafe in Back Bay and does not let herself think about Theo's face in the photograph, because if she thinks about that, she will stop being the woman Rourke has calculated and become something else entirely, something that doesn't have a plan, and she cannot afford that yet. The cafe has warm light in the windows. She can see from the street a man already at a corner table, his coat over the back of his chair, his coffee in front of him, his face turned toward the door with the patience of someone who knew she would come. Rourke looks up as she pushes through the door. He smiles, that wide, warm, entirely surface smile, and gestures to the chair across from him, and she crosses the room and sits down, and he looks at her with the satisfaction of a man whose calculation has been confirmed, and she looks back at him with the steady composure of a woman who has accepted, completely and without reservation, that there is no version of tonight in which she is not the most dangerous person at this table. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he says. She picks up the menu, doesn't open it, sets it down. "Yes, you were," she says. He leans back in his chair, and the smile shifts into something that isn't quite a smile anymore, something older and more honest underneath it. And for the first time since she walked into his world, Nora sees the actual face of the man she's been dealing with, stripped of the performance, looking at her across a small table in the rain-wet light of a Back Bay cafe, with the specific expression of someone who has finally decided to stop pretending. "All right," Rourke says, "let's talk about what you actually know." And underneath her jacket, pressed against the inner seam, the device is warm against her ribs, and somewhere across the city Vera Cross is tracing money through numbered accounts, and Marcus Vane is moving pieces she can't see, and Theo is alive in a car she hasn't found yet, and everything that happens next depends on how long she can keep this man talking. She folds her hands on the table, keeps her breathing even. "Let's start with Briggs," she says. The smile doesn't leave Rourke's face, but something behind it moves. A small, fast recalibration, the specific micro-expression of a man who expected to be holding all the cards and has just been shown one he didn't know was in the deck. "Briggs," he repeats, "the numbered account, the attorney, the financial architecture you don't fully control." She watches his eyes. "I know the split, I know what you have and what he has and why you needed it that way." Rourke is quiet for 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, she reads everything she needs to read. The stillness is too controlled, the kind of stillness that costs something to maintain. "You've been busy," he says. "I had time," she says. "Quiet house, good coffee." He looks at her with something that is, for the first time, genuine. Not warmth, something sharper than warmth. Appraisal. The real kind. Not the inventory he ran on her the first day. "What do you want?" he says. "My brother." "That's it?" "That's everything," she says. "You want me out of Marcus's orbit. I want Theo alive and clear. Those two things can coexist." Rourke wraps both hands around his coffee cup. Thinks. "And Marcus?" "Marcus is your problem," she says. "Not mine." The lie sits cleanly on the surface of the sentence, and she holds it there without blinking, and Rourke looks at her for a long moment, and she watches him decide whether she's telling the truth. "Briggs won't release the boy without something from me," Rourke says. "Then give him something." "It's not that simple." "It never is," she says. "But you called this meeting, which means you need something from me that's worth more to you than leverage over Marcus. So tell me what it is." Rourke sets his cup down, looks at her with the full weight of his attention, all the performance finally gone, and what's underneath it is not the patient, avuncular man from the estate lunches. What's underneath it is someone who has been running a very long game and is now, for the first time, uncertain how it ends. "The financial records you found," he says. "How much did you copy?" And there it is, the thing he came for. Not her compliance, her silence, specifically silence about Briggs, about the account, about the architecture that Rourke himself doesn't fully own and cannot fully protect. He isn't afraid of Marcus. He's afraid of Briggs finding out how much she knows. She leans forward slightly. "Enough," she says. Rourke's jaw tightens. 1 millimeter. She catches it. "Then we have something to discuss," he says quietly. Outside, the rain picks up against the cafe windows, and somewhere in the city her phone buzzes once in her pocket. Marcus, she knows without looking, which means the clock has just changed. And she keeps her eyes on Rourke and does not reach for it, because the most important thing she can do right now is make this man believe she is exactly where he wants her, right up until the moment he discovers she never was. The phone buzzes again. Nora keeps her eyes on Rourke and lets it buzz, and watches him watch her not reach for it, and something in his expression shifts. The first real crack in the performance, a splinter of uncertainty running through the confidence he walked in with. "You should check that," he says. "I'm in a conversation," she says. "It might be important." "So is this." He looks at her hands on the table, still, completely still, the specific stillness of someone who has made a decision about what this moment requires and is holding it without effort. And she watches him revise her again, the way he's been revising her since the first lunch, each revision costing him something he didn't budget for. "The records," he says. "What you found on Briggs. Who else has seen them?" "That depends," she says. "On what?" "On what you're offering me." Rourke leans forward. The warmth is entirely gone now, and what's underneath is cold and specific and considerably more honest. "I'm offering you your brother in one piece. That should be sufficient." "Theo was already mine before you took him," she says. "You're not offering me something new. You're offering to return something you stole. Those aren't the same transaction." The muscle in Rourke's jaw works once. "You're not in a position to negotiate terms." "Neither are you," she says. "Briggs doesn't know how much I found. You came here to find out before he does, which means you're managing two problems simultaneously, and I'm one of them. A man managing two problems simultaneously is not a man with leverage. He's a man with a scheduling conflict." Rourke stares at her. For 3 full seconds, he doesn't say anything, and the cafe noise fills the gap. Espresso machine, low music, the rain on the windows. And then his phone lights up on the table between them, and he glances at it involuntarily. And she reads the name on the screen upside down in the half-second before he flips it face down. "Briggs." She keeps her face neutral. Underneath her ribs, her heart rate has kicked up to something she can feel in her throat, but nothing reaches her face, and Rourke looks back at her, and the fact that he flipped the phone tells her everything she needed confirmed. Briggs is moving without him. "You need to take that," she says. "It can wait." "It really can't," she says. "Because if Briggs is calling you right now, it means something changed on his end. And if something changed on his end without you knowing it was going to change, enough." Rourke picks up the phone, stands. He takes 3 steps toward the back of the cafe, turning his back to her, and puts the phone to his ear, and she watches the line of his shoulders and reads the conversation by the way his body holds it. The first few seconds loose, then tightening, then a stillness that is not composure, but something closer to shock. She reaches into her jacket pocket. Not for her phone, for the folded piece of paper she put there before she left the estate. The account numbers Vera pulled, printed on plain paper, the specific financial fingerprint of Briggs's operation laid out in the clean, cold language of traced money. She puts it on the table in front of Rourke's empty chair. Then she sits back and waits. He comes back in 45 seconds. He looks at the paper, looks at her. The color of his face has changed in a way that has nothing to do with the cafe lighting. "Where did you get this?" he says. His voice is different, stripped of texture. "Does it matter?" "Nora." First time he's used her name directly. "Where did you get this?" "From the same place I got everything else," she says. "The patterns were there. I found them." She nods at the paper. "Briggs has been building an exit. Those accounts have been receiving transfers for 8 months. Not from your operation. From a third party you don't have visibility on. Someone has been paying Briggs to deliver the network to them intact, which means Briggs was never planning to hand it to you. He was planning to hand you to whoever's been funding his exit, collect his fee, and disappear." Rourke sits down. He does it slowly, the way people sit when their legs have made the decision before their brain caught up. "You're saying someone bought him out from under me," he says. "8 months ago," she says. "Around the same time you started moving against Marcus, which I don't think is a coincidence." His eyes are doing something complicated. The specific calculation of a man restructuring a reality he built and discovering the foundation was someone else's property all along. Her phone buzzes a third time. This time she looks at it. A text from a number she doesn't recognize. New, clean, never used before. 3 words that are not from Marcus and not from Vera and stop every other calculation in her head cold. Depot, East Boston. Now. Below it, a second message, arriving as she reads the first. A photograph. Not Theo this time. Marcus, on his knees on concrete, a man behind him with a weapon. A space she recognizes from Vera's description of the warehouse, the one listed in 3 of the 7 shell companies, the one whose use she never identified. Her hands are not still anymore. She closes them around the phone and breathes through it, and does not let what's happening in her chest reach her face, and it costs her more than anything has cost her in 22 days. Rourke is watching her. "That's Briggs," she says. It isn't a question. "Yes," Rourke says quietly. "He has Marcus." I didn't know he was going to, Does he still have Theo?" she says. "I don't know." Rourke. She looks at him across the table with something that is past fear, past anger, something colder and more structural than either. "Does Briggs still have my brother?" Rourke picks up his phone, makes a call. 12 seconds, no answer, makes another, 8 seconds. Then someone picks up and he says 4 words. "Where's the boy?" And listens, and the way he listens, the specific quality of the silence tells her the answer before he lowers the phone. "Briggs moved him to the depot," Rourke says, "an hour ago, before he..." He stops. "I didn't know he had eyes on Vane." "But you knew about the depot." "Yes." "You've been there." "Yes." She stands up. "Then you're driving." He looks at her. "This isn't something you walk into without..." "My brother and the man I married are in a warehouse in East Boston, and Briggs is deciding right now what to do with them." She picks up her jacket. "You want to tell me what the alternative is? I'm listening. Otherwise, get up." Rourke gets up. They move through the cafe and out into the rain, and she is already texting Vera one-handed as they hit the sidewalk. The depot address, Marcus inside, Briggs, need backup now. And then she silences the phone and puts it in her pocket and gets into Rourke's car, and he gets behind the wheel, and for 30 seconds, neither of them speaks. "Why are you taking me with you?" Rourke says. "Because you're the only person in this situation Briggs isn't expecting," she says. "And because if Marcus dies in that building, the first thing I'm going to do when I walk out of it is make sure everything I found about your operation goes to every federal contact Vera Cross has cultivated in 11 years. So you have a significant personal interest in how tonight ends." Rourke starts the car. The drive to East Boston is 14 minutes in the rain, and she spends every one of them building the map of the depot in her head from what Vera described. Decommissioned freight space, high windows, a main floor with structural columns, south and north entrances, loading dock on the east face. She has never been inside it. She is going to have to navigate it on instinct and what she can read in real time, which is either enough or it isn't. "How many men does Briggs have?" she says. "Inside the depot, typically 4. Tonight, more." Rourke's eyes are on the road. He knew this was coming. He'll have prepared. "Exits?" 3 I know of. There may be more. He's had access to the space for 2 years. "Weapons?" "Everything." "Do you have anything?" Rourke reaches into his coat without taking his eyes off the road and produces a handgun she recognizes as a 9mm and sets it on the console between them. She looks at it. She has fired a weapon exactly 4 times in her life, at a range in New Hampshire with a boyfriend who thought it would be a romantic activity and was wrong about almost everything. She picks it up, checks the magazine the way she was shown. Full. "You know how to use that," Rourke says. "Well enough," she says, which is not precisely true, but is the only answer available. He pulls off the highway, and the street's narrow, and the industrial waterfront materializes around them. Dark buildings, chain link, the smell of salt water and diesel that means they're close to the harbor. She can see the depot 2 blocks ahead, a long, low building with no light showing in the high windows, which means either it's empty or everyone inside it is being careful. Rourke parks a block short, cuts the engine. In the sudden quiet, she can hear her own pulse. "South entrance," he says. There's a side door in the loading dock bay that Briggs doesn't use because the latch is broken from the outside. You can get it open from inside by, "I'm not going in through the loading dock," she says. "I'm going in through the front." He stares at her. "That's insane." "Briggs sent me that photo," she says. "Which means he wants me here. Which means the front door is the only entrance he's not going to shoot me through the moment I open it." "He wants you here so he can use you," Rourke says, "not so he can have a conversation." "Then I'll make it a short conversation." She looks at him. "South entrance, loading dock, broken latch. You go that way. You find Theo first, not Marcus, Theo. You get him out the south exit and you don't stop moving. Can you do that?" "And what are you doing while I'm—" "Keeping Briggs focused on me," she says. "Nora, if he decides you're not useful, then Marcus will do something about it," she says. "He's still in there. He's not restrained the way he looks in that photo. If he were, Briggs wouldn't need to show me the weapon. He's showing me the weapon because Marcus is still a variable." She opens the car door. "Give me 3 minutes to get through the front, then you move." She doesn't wait for his answer. She gets out of the car and into the rain and starts walking toward the depot, and the rain hits her face and soaks through her jacket, and she doesn't feel any of it because her entire body has narrowed to a single point of focus. The door ahead of her, the building behind it, and the 2 people inside it she is not leaving without. She pushes through the front entrance. The depot floor opens up around her, but enormous, cold, the high broken windows letting in enough ambient city light to see the columns, the concrete, the specific geography of the space. She clocks it in 3 seconds. 4 men visible, 2 near the south wall, 1 by the east loading doors, 1 directly ahead. Theo in a chair 15 feet back, wrists bound, head up, alive, awake, eyes finding her immediately with an expression that breaks something in her chest, and she doesn't let it. Marcus on his knees 12 feet to Theo's left, hands behind him, a man behind him whose face she doesn't recognize. Marcus is looking at her with the controlled expression of someone communicating without speaking, and what he's communicating in the specific language of a man who has been in rooms like this before is, "I'm not as compromised as I look. Be ready." And at the center of it all, Harlan Briggs. He is smaller than she expected, medium height, lean, a face that wouldn't register in any room he didn't want it to register in. He looks at her the way you look at a variable that's arrived ahead of schedule and needs to be recalculated. "You came faster than I thought," he says. "I had a ride," she says. His eyes move to the door behind her. "Rourke." "He dropped me off," she says. "He's done." Briggs looks at her with the flat assessment of a man deciding whether he believes something. Rourke doesn't walk away from things. "Rourke walked away from this one," she says, "because I showed him what you've been building on the back end, the third-party payments, the exit accounts." She takes 2 steps forward, slow, non-threatening, placing herself between the column and the direct line to Marcus. "He knows you are never going to hand him the network. He knows whoever's been funding your exit has been planning to absorb the operation from the outside, which means Rourke ends up with nothing. A man with nothing to protect makes different decisions than a man trying to hold something." Briggs is very still. "Which buyer?" he says. And the question, the specific phrasing of it, which buyer, rather than what are you talking about, confirms everything Vera traced, confirms the architecture, confirms that there is in fact a third party, and Briggs is in fact their instrument, and the network was never Rourke's endgame. It was always going to be absorbed into something larger from the outside. "I don't know their name yet," she says honestly, "but I have enough of their financial fingerprint that I will, and when I do—" "When you do, it won't matter," Briggs says, "because you won't be in a position to do anything with it." He nods to the man behind Marcus, and Marcus moves. Not the way a restrained man moves, the way a man who has been choosing his moment moves, fast and economical, driving his elbow back into the man behind him with the specific force of someone who has been calculating the angle for the last 20 minutes. The man goes down hard. Marcus is on his feet in the same motion, and the two men by the south wall are moving, and the man by the loading doors is moving, and Nora is already behind the column with the 9mm in both hands the way she was shown, and she fires once at the floor in front of the man closest to Theo. Not at him, at the floor, because she needs him to stop moving more than she needs him injured. And it works. He stops. 1 full second of stopped motion that is enough for Marcus to cover the distance to the second man. The south entrance blows open. Rourke comes through it with two men she's never seen, moving with the coordinated speed of people who do this for a living. And the geometry of the room changes entirely. Briggs's 4 men suddenly facing pressure from 2 directions, the odds restructuring in the space of 6 seconds. Briggs looks at the room, looks at Nora. He reaches into his coat. "Don't," she says. Her voice is level, the gun is level. Her hands are shaking, but the gun is not. And she looks at him over the sight, and he looks back at her and reads something in her face that makes him go very still. "You won't," he says. "I won't have to," she says, and she means it, because from the south entrance she can hear Rourke saying federal warrant, hands, 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 and the specific chaos of Briggs's men making individual decisions about their survival, 2 of them going to the floor immediately, 1 of them not, and Marcus dealing with the one who doesn't in a way that ends the conversation quickly. Briggs drops his hand, not because she convinced him, because behind her, through the front entrance, she hears shoes on concrete, not Rourke's men, different cadence, different number. And she hears a voice say, "Federal agents, nobody move." And she understands in the specific way she's been understanding things in this building that Vera Cross's 40-year cultivation of professional relationships has just come through in the most concrete possible way. And the third variable in this equation has arrived. She keeps the gun on Briggs until a federal agent steps into her peripheral vision and puts his own weapon at Briggs's chest, and then she lowers hers and her hands are shaking properly now, the full tremor of adrenaline finding nowhere else to go. And she puts the gun on the concrete floor because she doesn't want to be holding it when she doesn't need to be. She goes to Theo. He's upright, blinking, the cut above his eye dried to a dark line. She gets his wrists free with the zip tie cutter Vera put in her pocket that she forgot she had until this moment, and his hands come apart, and he grabs her forearm with both of his and holds on. "I've got you," she says. "Nor, I've got you," she says again. "You're done. It's done." He doesn't cry. He makes a sound that isn't quite a word and leans his forehead against her shoulder for 1 moment, and she puts her hand on the back of his head and holds it there. And around them the depot is full of voices and motion and the specific controlled chaos of a situation being taken apart and documented, and she lets it be noise while she holds her brother and breathes. When she lifts her head, Marcus is across the room, watching her. His face has a cut on the cheekbone, and his jacket is destroyed, and he is standing in the middle of a federal operation, looking at her with the specific expression of a man who sent someone into danger and is accounting for the cost of that decision in real time. And she looks back at him, and neither of them has the words for it yet. And that's fine, because the words can wait until the room is quieter and the adrenaline has burned down to something manageable. Rourke is against the south wall with a federal agent beside him. Not restrained, but not free either. The particular middle space of a man who has made a deal he hasn't finished paying for yet. He looks at Nora across the room, and she looks back at him, and she reads in his face with the cold clarity of someone who has been reading rooms her entire professional life, that whatever calculation he ran when she got out of the car and walked toward this building, she was not the answer he expected to come up with. She turns away from him. She doesn't need anything else from Rourke tonight. A federal agent, young, precise, a face that hasn't learned to hide its exhaustion yet, approaches her with a recorder and a question she already knows is coming. "Ma'am, we're going to need a statement." "I know," she says. "Give me 2 minutes." He nods and steps back, and she looks down at Theo, who is sitting on the concrete with his back against the chair he was tied to, looking at the ceiling with the hollow expression of someone whose body has just remembered it's been running on terror for 6 hours. "Can you stand?" she says. "Yeah." He doesn't move. "In a minute." She sits down next to him on the concrete. The cold comes through her jacket immediately. She doesn't care. "I'm sorry," Theo says. "I know." "Nora, I'm really Theo. She says it quietly, not unkindly. "Not tonight. Tonight you just breathe." He nods. Breathes. She can feel him working at it, the specific conscious effort of someone trying to bring their body back from somewhere it didn't choose to go. Marcus crosses the room. He crouches down in front of both of them, not performing, not managing, just coming down to their level. And he looks at Theo first, the way a man looks at something he's responsible for that came out intact against the odds. And then he looks at Nora. "Vera's outside," he says. "She wants to know if you're hurt." "Tell her no." "Are you?" She takes stock. Her hands have stopped shaking. Her knees ache from the concrete. The device under her jacket has been transmitting for 2 hours, and she can feel the edge of the medical tape pulling at her skin. "No," she says. Marcus holds her gaze for one long moment. Then he puts his hand briefly on her shoulder. Just that, just the weight of it, 3 seconds, and stands up. Across the depot, Briggs is being walked toward the north exit in handcuffs, and he turns once to look back at the room, and his eyes find Nora on the concrete floor next to her brother. And whatever he expected to see in her face, he doesn't find it, because what's there isn't triumph or relief or the particular brightness of someone who has just won something. What's there is just the quiet of a woman who did what needed doing and is now sitting with her brother in the wreckage of a night that could have ended 6 different worse ways, waiting for her legs to be ready to carry her out of it. She reaches over and takes Theo's hand. He squeezes back, hard, and doesn't let go. Outside, Boston keeps moving, indifferent, relentless, already forgetting this particular darkness the way it forgets all the others. And inside the depot, the federal agents work the scene, and Rourke answers questions in a low voice against the south wall, and Marcus stands at the center of it all, watching the room close down around the thing that's been building for 11 years. And somewhere in the city, the night is already becoming the next day, ordinary and unstoppable, arriving whether anyone is ready for it or not. Nora stands up, pulls Theo up with her. He's unsteady for one step, then finds his footing. The federal agent with the recorder comes back. She nods at him. "Ready," she says. She gives the statement in 12 minutes. Precise, sequential, everything on record. The device under her jacket has caught every word Rourke and Briggs spoke tonight. Vera has the stream. The case is already building itself from the inside out. When she finishes, she walks out the front entrance into the rain. Marcus falls into step beside her without a word. Theo takes her other side. The 3 of them walk toward the car, and behind them the depot lights up with forensic work. And ahead of them the city opens up, still dark, but differently dark now. The kind of dark that comes just before morning when the worst of the night is finally irrevocably done. The rain stops at 4:17 in the morning. Nora is sitting in the back of a federal vehicle with a thermal blanket around her shoulders that she doesn't remember anyone putting there, watching through the window as the depot gets processed. The lights, the movement, the specific bureaucratic machinery of an investigation taking possession of a crime scene. Theo's asleep against her shoulder with the totality of someone whose body simply stopped negotiating and went offline, and she lets him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, feeling his breathing even out into something steady and real. Marcus is outside talking to a federal agent she hasn't been introduced to, a woman in her 50s with the no-ceremony effect of someone who has been doing this work long enough that the doing of it is enough, no performance required. They've been talking for 20 minutes. Nora can't hear them through the glass, but she reads the conversation in posture and gesture. Marcus giving, the agent receiving, both of them understanding that what's being handed over tonight is not just evidence, but the end of something that has been running a long time. She watches him and thinks about the first night, the 3 black SUVs in her Dorchester street, the rain, the man in the dark coat who stood in her doorway and didn't push through it. The specific quality of that moment, which she has turned over many times in 22 days, was not fear exactly, though fear was present. It was the recognition of a door closing. The version of her life that existed before that knock, the diner, The double shifts, the careful management of Theo's disasters, had ended, and she hadn't chosen the ending, and what was on the other side of it was entirely unknown. She looks at the depot, at Marcus, at the federal lights washing the wet street in alternating color. She thinks, I chose this side of the door. Every step after the first one was a choice. It doesn't make her feel better. It makes her feel accurate, which is more useful. Theo stirs, makes a sound that isn't a word. His hand tightens on her arm for a moment and then releases as he settles back under. She stays very still and lets him sleep. The twist comes at 5:40 in the morning, in a conference room on the third floor of a federal building in downtown Boston that smells of old coffee and recycled air, and it comes from a direction nobody in the room was looking. Nora's across a table from two federal agents, the 50-something woman from the depot, whose name is Agent Diane Rawls, and a younger man named Carver, who takes notes with the focused efficiency of someone who understands that his job in this room is to record, not to interpret. Marcus is beside her. Vera Cross arrived 20 minutes ago and is in the corner with her own counsel, a compact man who communicated confidence entirely through the specific economy of his movements. Rourke is in a different room down the hall. Briggs is in federal custody and has, according to Rawls, already requested representation and said nothing beyond his name. Nora has given her full statement twice. She is on her third coffee. Her jacket is dry, but her shoes aren't, and she can feel the cold of the linoleum coming through the soles. Rawls sets a photograph on the table. Not from the depot. Not from any location Nora recognizes. An exterior shot. A building in what looks like a financial district, glass and steel, a company logo visible above the entrance that she can read clearly from where she's sitting. Callaway Meridian Group. She looks at the photograph. Looks at Rawls. What is this? The third party, Rawls says. The buyer Briggs was working for. Callaway Meridian Group is a private equity firm with offices in 6 cities. On paper, legitimate. Real estate acquisition, financial restructuring, distressed asset management. Rawls pauses. Off paper, they've been identified in 3 separate federal investigations over the past 7 years as a likely vehicle for absorbing criminal network assets and laundering them into legitimate investment portfolios. We've never been able to get inside their financial structure. Until now, Marcus says. Until the account records your wife pulled, Rawls says, and the word wife lands in the room with a weight that nobody addresses. Briggs's exit accounts trace directly to a Callaway Meridian shell in the Cayman Islands. That's the link we've been building toward for 4 years. Nora looks at the photograph of the building. Clean glass, corporate logo, the specific architecture of something that is designed to look like it has nothing to hide. How many networks, she says, that we can currently document? 7 across 4 states. Rawls looks at her steadily. What you found in 12 days from a guest room and a shared desktop gave us the thread we pull to unravel all of it. The room is quiet for a moment with the weight of that number. 7 networks. The math of the families inside them. The Theos, the 20-year-olds who got in over their heads and found out too late, is a number she doesn't try to calculate because it will be too large to sit with right now. What do you need from me? She says. Testimony, Rawls says. When the case goes to trial, Briggs, Rourke, and eventually Callaway Meridian's principals will need you on record. Everything you found, how you found it, the sequence of events from the night you signed the marriage agreement to the depot. All of it, Nora says. All of it. She looks at Marcus. He looks back at her with the expression of a man who has already made his own calculation about this and is waiting to see if hers matches. Yes, she says. Whatever you need. Rawls nods once, closes her folder. There's one more thing. She takes out a second photograph. Not a building this time. A face. A man in his 60s, suit, the particular groomed confidence of serious money. Victor Callaway, founder and principal of Callaway Meridian. He's been under passive surveillance for 2 years. 2 days ago, before the depot, before any of this broke, he boarded a private flight out of Logan. The room processes that. He knew, Marcus says. He knew something was moving, Rawls says. We don't know how, but he's outside U.S. jurisdiction as of 40 hours ago, and recovering him is a separate operation that will take time we don't have a timeline for. Nora looks at the photograph of Victor Calloway. 60-something, silver-haired, a face that has spent decades being photographed at charity functions and board meetings, and the specific public-facing events of a man who has built an identity around his respectability. She has never seen him before in her life. He has been, without her knowledge, the reason her brother spent 2 years sinking into debt, the reason 3 black SUVs came to her Dorchester Street on a rainy Tuesday night, the reason she signed papers at midnight and moved into a stranger's house and spent 22 days turning herself into something she didn't know she could be. She studies his face for a long time. You'll find him, she says. It isn't a question, and it isn't encouragement. It's the flat statement of someone who has learned in the last 3 weeks that the specific kind of patience required to trace money through 7 shell companies across 4 states is the same patience required to find a man who thought he was safely gone. We'll find him, Rawls says. Nora sets the photograph down, picks up her coffee, finishes it. Then I think we're done for tonight, she says. They walk out of the federal building at 6:51 in the morning into a Boston that is doing what Boston always does, getting on with it, indifferent to whatever happened in the dark, the morning commute already building, the sky the specific gray of a city that doesn't do dramatic sunrises. It just gets incrementally lighter until suddenly it's day. Theo is in a chair in the lobby, asleep again, his head against the wall, and Marcus goes to wake him gently while Nora stands outside the building and breathes the cold air and lets it hit the back of her throat and stays there for a minute. Just that. Just breathing in a city that is still standing, and so is she. Vera comes out beside her, stands without speaking for a moment, which is one of the things Nora has come to appreciate about her. The specific intelligence of knowing when silence is the right response. Calloway, Nora says. I heard, Vera says, you have contacts. I have contacts, Vera says. Different kind than Rawls's. Slower in some ways, faster in others. When he surfaces, I'll know, Vera says. And you'll know. Nora nods. She looks at the street. A cab goes by. A woman walks past with a coffee and a bag, and the focused expression of someone who has somewhere to be and is going to be there. The ordinary machinery of a morning. Thank you, Nora says. For the call. For the federal contact. Vera is quiet for a moment. Marcus trusted you from the second week, she says. He doesn't trust quickly. I paid attention to that. What did you conclude? That you were the most dangerous person in that house, Vera says, and that you were using it entirely in the right direction. She picks up her bag. Get some sleep, Nora. The paperwork starts tomorrow, and it doesn't end for a long time. She walks to her car, and Nora watches her go and thinks about the word dangerous, and what it means when it's true, and what it costs to be it, and whether the cost is one she'd pay again. She would. She knows that without having to think about it very hard. Marcus comes out with Theo, who is awake in the partial way of someone running on no sleep and the residue of fear. Upright, functional, not quite present. He looks at Nora, and she looks at him, and they don't say anything for a moment because there is too much to say, and this isn't the place for any of it. I need food, Theo says finally. It breaks something open in Nora's chest that she didn't know was closed. She almost laughs, the specific involuntary sound of it. Not quite a laugh, something wetter than that. And she puts her arm around her brother's shoulders and steers him toward the car. We'll find somewhere, she says. They find a diner 6 blocks from the federal building, the kind that has been there since before any of them were born and will be there after, with vinyl booths and a menu that hasn't changed and coffee that comes without being asked for. They slide into a booth, Theo across from Nora and Marcus, which is the configuration that happens naturally, nobody choosing it. And the server comes, and Theo orders eggs and toast and orange juice and then adds bacon and then adds pancakes, and the server writes it all down without comment, and Nora orders coffee and nothing else. And Marcus orders coffee and a thing off the menu he points to because he's been awake for 22 hours and doesn't have the words for what it is. The food comes. They eat. For a long time, nobody talks. Then Theo sets down his fork, and looks at Nora across the table and says, "I'm going to fix it." She looks at him. His face is different from the face in the photograph Rourke sent. Not because the cut has been cleaned, though it has, but because something behind his eyes has changed. The recklessness she's been navigating around for 2 years, the specific lightness of someone who hasn't yet been made to understand that consequences are real and final, is gone. What's there instead is not maturity exactly, not yet, but the particular gravity of someone who has sat in a chair with their hands zip-tied while the people they love walked into danger on their behalf, and has had several hours to think about what that means. "I know," she says. "Not just stop gambling," he says. "Actually fix it, the whole thing. I think I need—" He stops, works at the words. "I think I need to talk to someone, professionally, because I've been trying to manage it on my own for 2 years, and I'm clearly not good at that." She doesn't say I've been telling you that because it's true, but it's not what this moment requires. "I'll help you find someone," she says. "I don't want you to manage it," he says. "I want you to help me find it, and then I'll manage it. There's a difference." She looks at her brother, 20 years old, beat up, eating pancakes in a federal district diner at 7 in the morning, and feels something ease in her chest that has been tight for so long she'd stopped registering it as tension. "Okay," she says. "That's a deal." Theo nods. Goes back to his pancakes, then, without looking up, "I like him, by the way." A beat. "Marcus, he seems real." Marcus, who has been drinking his coffee and staying out of the conversation with the specific tact of a man who understands when he's not the center of it, doesn't react visibly. But Nora sees the slight adjustment in his posture, the way a person shifts when something lands that they weren't prepared for and don't want to show. "He is," Nora says. They sit in the diner until 8:15, until the morning crowd fills in around them and the noise level rises to the particular frequency of a city starting its day. And then they pay and go outside, and Theo gets into the back of Marcus's car and is asleep again before they've gone 2 blocks. Nora and Marcus ride in the front in silence for a while. Not the silence of people who have nothing to say, the silence of people who have too much and are choosing the order carefully. It's Marcus who speaks first. "The marriage agreement," he says. She looks at him. "I want to tear it up," he says. That's not, I want to make that clear. What I mean is, I want to tear up the version that was a transaction and start from wherever this actually is." He pauses. "Which I recognize is a harder thing to define." "It is," she says. "I'm not asking you to define it tonight." "Good," she says. "Because I can't. Tonight I'm asking you to drive us home and let me sleep for 8 hours, and then I'll think about what I want to say." "Fair," he says. She leans her head back against the seat, watches the city go past, a hardware store opening its gate, a school bus making a turn. 2 women walking dogs in opposite directions, stopping to let the dogs meet, the specific social ritual of it unfolding on the sidewalk with all its ordinary complexity. "Marcus?" she says. "Yeah." "The 119 families," she says. "Rawls mentioned it. The debt network. All the people caught in it." "I know," he says. "That's the first thing," she says. "Before the restructuring, before whatever comes next with the organization. That's the first thing." "Yes," he says. It comes out with the weight of a man who has already been sitting with this, who needed to hear it said aloud not because he didn't know it, but because hearing it from her makes it a commitment rather than an intention. "Yes, I know." She closes her eyes. She doesn't sleep, not quite, but she rests, which is something she hasn't done in 22 days, the specific internal loosening of a person who has put down a weight they've been carrying long enough that they'd stopped feeling its shape. The estate appears through the windshield at 8:47, the gate opening as they approach, the garden beyond it wet and overgreen from the rain. It looks the same as it looked the first night she saw it, expensive, guarded, the architecture of a life built on the assumption that the world requires fortification. But she has been inside it long enough now to know that what it actually is, beneath the surface and the security and the careful structure, is a place where someone has been trying, imperfectly and with incomplete information, to build something that holds. She gets out of the car. Theo wakes up when the engine stops and climbs out blinking and looks at the house with the expression of someone seeing it for the first time, which he is. "This is where you live now?" he says. "For now," she says. "Huh." He looks at it for another moment. "Nice garden." She puts her hand on his shoulder and steers him toward the door. The weeks that follow are the hardest ones, which is not what anyone would expect after surviving what they survived in the depot. But the depot was a single night with a clear geometry: enter, act, exit. And what comes after it has no geometry at all. It is paperwork and federal meetings and the specific grinding work of an investigation that is only beginning its formal phase. And it is Sutton being walked off the property by two men who don't explain themselves to the remaining staff. And it is the staff absorbing that absence and recalibrating in the specific way of people who work in proximity to power and have learned not to ask certain questions. And it is Marcus spending long hours in his study dismantling the architecture of 11 years piece by piece, identifying what can be kept and what has to go, and what the cost of the difference is. He does this without theater. That's what she notices most. He doesn't perform the transformation or narrate it to anyone who will listen. He just does it the way he does most things, directly, specifically, without sentimentality about what it costs him to close what he's closing. She asks him once, a week after the depot, sitting in the kitchen at 9 in the evening, while Theo is in the guest room on the phone with a therapist he found through a referral Nora tracked down and then handed to him and did not follow up on, because she promised him she wouldn't manage it. "Do you regret it?" she says. "Any of it, the way it was built." Marcus is quiet for a moment. He has the specific stillness of someone answering a question they've been running on their own for a long time. "I regret the parts I was careless about," he says. "The parts I didn't look at closely enough because looking at them would have required changing them. That's different from regretting the whole thing." "Is it?" "The people who work for me," he says, "the ones who are staying into whatever comes next, they made choices too. They had options. Most of them chose this because it was the best option available to them, not because there was nothing else." He looks at his coffee. "I'm not going to tell them the whole thing was wrong and they should feel bad about it. That's too easy. What I can do is make the next thing better." She thinks about this. "The 119 families," she says. "How far along?" 43 contacted so far," he says. "Through the intermediary. No names attached to the offer. Just a legal firm and a debt cancellation instrument. 31 have accepted. 12 didn't respond." "Because they don't trust it," she says. "Yes. We need someone they'll trust," she says. "Not a legal firm. A person. Someone who's been inside the same system they've been inside." Marcus looks at her. "You're thinking about Theo." "I'm thinking Theo is going to need something to do when he's ready," she says. "Something that connects what happened to him to something that matters. That's different from giving him a job. It's giving him a reason." Marcus is quiet for a long moment, then, "That's his choice." "Yes," she says. "I'll mention it. Once, and then it's his." She mentions it on a Sunday morning 3 weeks later, over coffee, and Theo listens and doesn't say anything for about a minute, and then he says, "How many of them are my age?" "Most of them," she says. He nods slowly. "Okay," he says. "Yeah, let me think about it." He thinks about it for 4 days and comes back with a yes that has a specific quality she hasn't heard from him before. Not impulsive, not performed, the yes of someone who has decided something and means the decision. She doesn't tell him she's proud of him. She refills his coffee and asks him when he wants to start. The Rourke sentencing happens on a Thursday in late March, in a federal courthouse that smells of old wood and institutional heating, and Nora is there for all of it, not in the gallery, in the room, because she is a named witness in the case, and her presence has been requested by Rawls. And she sits in a seat 3 rows back from the defense table and watches Dominic Rourke stand before a federal judge and hear his future described in the flat, specific language of the law. Rourke cooperated. Fully, ultimately. Not immediately, not easily, but completely, in the end. because Vera's contacts and Rawls's operation made the alternative untenable. His cooperation cracked the Callaway Meridian case open at a structural level that 4 years of passive surveillance had never managed to reach. And Victor Callaway, who believed he had safely exited the country, discovered 6 weeks after the depot that a private flight to a non-extradition destination is only as safe as the network that arranged it, and Vera Cross's contacts moved in different channels than Callaway's money did. And he was detained in a way that was not public and not gentle, and resulted in a quiet return and a very loud set of federal charges that are still being processed and will be for a long time. Nora doesn't feel satisfaction at any of this exactly. What she feels is the specific relief of a closed door. Not a good door, not a door she would have chosen, but a door that is definitively shut and will not be opening again. She feels that most clearly when Rourke is led out of the courtroom and he pauses at the door, just for a moment, just long enough to turn and scan the room, and his eyes find her in the third row, and she looks back at him with the steadiness of someone who has nothing left to communicate to him, and he looks at her for 3 seconds and then looks away and goes through the door. She exhales. Outside the courthouse, Marcus is waiting at the bottom of the steps. He didn't come in. He made this call himself without being asked, understanding that the specific weight of this particular room was hers to carry without him in it. She comes down the steps, and he falls into step beside her, and they walk toward the car, and the March air is cold and direct, and she tilts her face into it. "Done?" he says. "Done," she says. They walk for half a block in silence. "I want to show you something," he says. He drives her to Roxbury, pulls up in front of a vacant lot on a residential street, cleared ground, a chain-link fence around it, a construction permit posted on the fence with the specific density of bureaucratic language that means something real is coming. "Site 1, he says, mixed-income residential, 40 units, city co-development." He looks at the lot. "Breaks ground in 6 weeks. She looks at the cleared ground, tries to see what it will be. "How many more?" she says. 3 identified, he says. "If the city approves the second application, 4. She nods. The wind comes through the chain link and moves her hair, and she stands in front of the vacant lot in a March afternoon in Roxbury and thinks about the night she sat across from him in his study and said, "This is what I need." And he said, "All right." And she understood for the first time that he wasn't performing, and how much has been built on that single moment of recognition. "I'm staying," she says. He looks at her. "I want to say it clearly," she says, "not as a response to something, not as a follow-up to a question. I'm staying because I want to. Because this," she gestures at the lot, at him, at the general architecture of what they've built, "is something I want to be part of building." Marcus is quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of someone taking something in without immediately putting it somewhere. "Okay," he says. "That's it? What else do you want me to say?" She looks at him. He's almost smiling. She has learned in the weeks since the depot that his almost smiles are more honest than most people's full ones. "Nothing," she says. "Okay is right." The wedding happens in May, on a Saturday afternoon when the city has finally committed to warmth, in a space in the South End that used to be something industrial and has been remade into something that breathes, 30 people. Flowers that Vera selected with the focused efficiency she brings to everything. Theo, in a suit that fits him, standing at the front of the room with the particular posture of someone who has been doing the work of becoming a person he can live with, and who is, incrementally, succeeding. When Nora walks in, she doesn't look at the room. She looks at Marcus, and he looks at her, and whatever passes between them in that moment is not cinematic and not performed. It is simply 2 people who chose each other in full knowledge of what choosing costs, deciding to keep choosing. The vows are short. She wrote hers in 20 minutes at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning, and they are not beautiful, but they are true. And true is the only register she knows how to operate in anymore. She promises to tell him the truth, even when it's inconvenient. She promises to keep paying attention, because attention is the only real currency she has ever had. She promises that when she finds something wrong, she'll bring it to him instead of carrying it alone. Not because she needs him to fix it, but because this is what it means to be in something together. He promises to hear her. He promises that every decision he makes will account for the people affected by it, not just the ones in the room. He promises that the man she's standing in front of today is the man he intends to remain, which is not a promise to be perfect, but a promise to be honest about falling short and to do the work of getting back up. Theo cries. He doesn't try to stop it, and nobody looks away. After, in the small hours of the morning, when the last of the 30 people have gone and the space is quiet and the city outside has settled into the particular frequency of very late Saturday night, Nora sits on the edge of the low stage at the end of the room with her shoes off and a glass of water, and Marcus beside her, his jacket gone, his tie loosened, both of them in the comfortable silence of people who have been through something and come out the other side and are learning what the other side feels like. Calloway's arraignment is Tuesday, she says. I know, he says. Rawls called this morning. They've identified 2 more networks connected to the Meridian structure, different cities. I know that too. She looks at the empty room, the flowers, the folded napkins, the glasses that will be cleaned in the morning by someone who wasn't here tonight. All of it temporary, all of it already becoming past. It doesn't stop, she says. Not a complaint, just the accounting of it. No, he says, but it changes shape. She thinks about that, about shape, the shape of a room, the shape of a debt, the shape of 2 people sitting on a stage at 2 a.m. after a day that closed something they both needed closed. I found the 5th company, she says. He looks at her. 12 days in, she says. I sat down at that desktop because I had nothing else to do, and I started looking, and I found the 5th company, and I sat with it for 4 days before I brought it to you because I was trying to figure out what kind of man you were before I handed you something that dangerous. What did you conclude? He says. That you were the kind of man who says all right and means it, she says, which is rarer than it should be. He looks at her for a moment with the expression she has come to know as his real face, not the controlled distance, not the professional flatness, the actual face underneath all of that, which is someone who is paying attention and has been for a long time. I concluded something too, he says, about you. What? That you were going to be the most complicated thing that ever happened to me, he says, and that I was going to be grateful for it. She looks at him. He's not almost smiling this time. He's just looking at her, level and honest, the way he looks at everything he means. Okay, she says. That's it? Okay is right, she says. Outside, Boston is doing what it does. Moving, noise, the perpetual machinery of a city that does not pause for anyone's conclusions. But in here, the room is quiet, and the flowers are still standing, and Nora Callahan sits with her shoes off and her water glass and the man she chose, and lets the quiet be what it is. Not an ending exactly, but a resting point, a breath between one thing and whatever comes next. And for right now, for this particular hour of this particular morning, that is completely and entirely enough.